They dragged me down the service stairs like I was a bag of laundry. No warning, no paperwork, no explanation beyond a smirk and a hand clamped around my elbow hard enough to bruise. The fluorescent lights above the stairwell flickered with every step, and the building changed as we descended. Less paint, more pipes, the air damp and sour, the kind of cold that crawls into your joints and stays there. All because I pushed a plastic tray away and said quietly that I would not eat spoiled meat. They called it non-compliance. I would learn a different word for it later. Punishment. I'm 72 years old. I'm a grandfather of 4. I've signed budgets larger than this whole facility. I've sat across from governors and donors and auditors, but in that moment, none of that mattered. In that basement, I was just another old man in hospital socks, being taught a lesson by people who enjoyed teaching lessons. And the worst part is this. When that heavy door shut behind me and the bolt slid into place, they didn't look worried. They looked entertained. They laughed like they'd done it 100 times before. They had no idea what I was doing there. They had no idea what I'd already recorded. They had no idea what would happen the day someone finally believed the old man they'd locked underground. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because to understand what that basement meant, you need to understand how I ended up in that nursing home in the first place, and why, from the moment I walked through those cheerful double doors, I knew I had to let them think I was powerless. I arrived at Brookfield Pines on a Tuesday morning, just after 9. A brochure had promised sunlit hallways, compassionate care, and dignity at every stage of life. The kind of language that sounds like a hymn until you hear the truth behind it. The lobby did its job. Fresh flowers, a piano no one played, a mural of a lake that looked nothing like any lake I'd ever seen. The receptionist smiled at me too brightly, as if she'd practiced that smile in a mirror, and handed me a clipboard without looking up. Fill these out. Sit over there. Over there was a row of chairs beneath a television mounted high enough that only the young could watch comfortably. A game show played at low volume. A woman in a wheelchair stared at the wall, not blinking. A man in slippers shuffled in circles like he was tracing a path only he could see. I sat, and I filled out the forms. My hands were steady. My heart was not. A young orderly in dark scrubs walked past, glanced at me, and snorted under his breath. "New one," he muttered, like I was a carton on a shelf. He had a tattoo on his forearm, an anchor badly done, and a plastic badge clipped to his pocket. His name read Marcus. Underneath, in smaller print, Care Associate, Care. If I'd been alone, I might have laughed at that word. Instead, I watched him. The way he walked like the building belonged to him. The way he avoided eye contact with residents, like looking at them too long might make him feel something. A second orderly came in behind him, a woman with a messy bun and tired eyes. She didn't snort. She didn't smile either. She carried a stack of blankets and moved with the efficiency of someone who'd learned not to waste breath. Her badge read, Janelle. She didn't look cruel. She looked exhausted. That matters. Exhaustion makes people sloppy. Sloppy people leave evidence. The admissions nurse finally called my name. Walter Mercer? I stood. I gave her the polite nod I'd given hundreds of staff members over the years. She led me through the lobby and into the back hallways where the flowers stopped and the air changed, where the paint on the walls looked scrubbed too often, where the sound of the television faded and was replaced by the constant low chorus of alarms and coughing and distant voices calling for help. My room was small. 1 bed, 1 window. A dresser that smelled faintly of bleach. The door had a keypad lock on the outside. That keypad should have bothered me more than it did, because I'd seen that sort of lock before, in places that didn't pretend. The nurse went through the routine. Blood pressure, med list, fall risk. She spoke in that practiced tone people use when they're talking to someone they've already categorized. At the end, she patted my shoulder. "You'll settle in. Just follow directions. The staff here will take care of you." Take care of me. The first time I asked for water, it took 40 minutes. Not because they were busy, because they wanted me to understand my place. The second time I asked, Marcus leaned in close enough that I could smell energy drink on his breath. Thirsty, huh? You're going to have to learn patience, Grandpa. Grandpa. He didn't say it kindly. And that's when it began. It wasn't one big act of cruelty at first. It was dozens of small ones, stacked day after day until they formed a wall around you. They knocked on my door at odd hours and opened it without waiting, flipping on the light like they were searching a closet, not entering a person's space. They spoke over my head. They discussed me in the hallway while I could hear every word. Mercer's a problem. Yeah, he's one of those. One of those what? The ones who think they're still somebody. They didn't forget to feed me in a way that looked like a mistake. They forgot me in a way that looked deliberate. Breakfast arrived lukewarm and late, if it arrived at all. Lunch sometimes came without utensils. Dinner came cold enough that the gravy had congealed like glue. Once I found my tray on the floor outside my door upside down, the food smeared into the carpet. Someone had stepped on it. You could see the tread. When I buzzed the call button, no one came. When I tried to open my door to go to the nurse's station myself, the keypad flashed red. Locked. I stood there, looking at that lock, feeling something cold move through my chest. Not fear, not exactly. Recognition. I pressed the call button again, and again. I waited. Nothing. I started knocking. Harder. The sound echoed down the corridor. Finally, Marcus appeared. He leaned against the doorframe like a man watching a dog scratch at a fence. What is it now? My tray was dropped. I need food. He glanced down at the mess, then back up at me. His eyes were flat. You'll live. Then he took out his phone and held it up, filming me through the small window in the door. What are you doing? Entertainment, he said, smiling without warmth. He walked away while still recording. That night, I heard laughter from the staff break room. I heard my own voice in the hallway, tinny and desperate, coming from someone's phone speaker. I heard myself asking for food. I heard someone mimic me in a high, wobbling tone. I need food. More laughter. Then a new voice, deeper. What's his name again? Door Daddy, someone said. Always at the door. Another voice chimed in. Nah, he's more like Captain Keypad. They laughed harder, like coming up with names was the funniest thing they'd ever done. That was how they did it. They gave every resident a nickname. Not in the affectionate way old communities sometimes do. In the way a pack does when it wants to strip someone down to a joke. I learned them in fragments, overheard when the staff thought no one was listening. Diaper King. Whaler. Miss Scream at Night. Naptime Nancy. And me. Captain Keypad. At first I didn't react. I let my face go blank. I let my shoulders slump. I moved slower like my body was giving up. It's difficult to describe what it takes to pretend to be weak when you are not. Your pride fights you. Your instincts scream at you to stand tall, to correct them, to demand respect. But pride doesn't keep you safe in places like that. Observation does. So I observed. I watched which staff members lingered near the medication cart too long. I watched whose hands went into pockets after family visits. I watched how often the cameras in the hallways actually pointed where they were supposed to point. I listened. People like Marcus loved to talk. They loved to tell stories about what they'd done, because in their heads it made them powerful. One evening, when they thought my door was shut tight enough that I couldn't hear, I caught a conversation that made my jaw tighten so hard my teeth ached. Basement's open again, Marcus said. Good, another male voice replied. That one belonged to Devon, tall, red-faced, always chewing gum. We got that new lock? Yeah, Rick got it. No one gets out unless we say. They laughed. Who's next? Janelle asked softly. There was a pause. Her voice didn't sound amused. It sounded cautious, like she didn't want the answer. Devin snorted. Whoever acts up, someone always acts up. Rick says we need to reset expectations, Marcus said, mimicking a serious voice, like we're running a prison. They laughed again, but the laughter was different this time, sharper, meaner. Janelle didn't laugh. I wrote the words basement and lock in my head like I was carving them into stone. 2 days later, the basement became more than a word. It happened at dinner. The tray arrived late, as usual, and I knew the smell before I lifted the lid. Sour, metallic, like meat that had been left too long under heat lamps. I looked up when Marcus came by. This is spoiled. He didn't even pretend to check. Eat it. I won't. His eyes narrowed. Devin appeared behind him like a shadow. Oh, Devin said, drawing the word out. Captain Keypad's got standards. I could have eaten it. I could have swallowed the spoiled food just to avoid what was coming. But there are lines, and I needed to see how far they would go when challenged. I set the fork down. No. That was all it took. Devin stepped into my room without permission. Marcus followed. Devin grabbed my arm, his fingers dug in. You want to be difficult? Devin hissed. We can make difficult happen. They hauled me up. My feet slid in my socks. The hallway spun slightly, not because I was dizzy, because the anger in me was rising fast and hot. The other residents turned their heads as I passed. Some stared blankly. Some flinched as if they could feel the grip on their own arms. A woman whispered, "No," over and over, like a prayer. Marcus pushed the service stairwell door open. The stairwell smelled like mop water and mildew. The lights buzzed. Devin didn't bother with the elevator. He dragged me down the steps, one hand tight on my arm, the other shoving at my back. My shoulder struck the railing. Pain flashed. I kept my breath even. I kept my face controlled. That control was the only thing I had in that moment. At the bottom, there was a heavy metal door with a keypad. Devin punched in a code without looking. The door clicked. Inside was a corridor lined with pipes. The air was colder. The sound of the building above faded into a low hum. Halfway down, Marcus pointed at a plain door with a small window. The cooler, he said. Cooler, as if they stored meat there. Devin opened it. The room beyond was concrete, walls, floor, ceiling. A single bare bulb, a drain in the center of the floor. A chair bolted to the ground like an afterthought. There was no bed, no blanket, no call button. A place designed not for care, but for erasing people. Devin shoved me inside. My knee hit the chair. The pain made my vision spark. Marcus stood in the doorway, phone already out, filming. Smile for the camera, Captain Keypad, he said. I looked straight at the lens. That moment is important, because it was the first time I let them see something other than fear. Not anger, not outrage. Calm. The kind of calm that unsettles bullies because it doesn't fit their script. Devin blinked. What's that look? Marcus scoffed. He thinks he's tough. Devin leaned in close. His gum breath hit my face. You don't eat when we say, you don't get to be upstairs. Then he stepped back and slammed the door. The bolt slid into place. The sound of it echoed in the concrete room like a verdict. I stood still for a few seconds, letting my eyes adjust. The bulb flickered. Water dripped somewhere. The cold was immediate. Not freezing, but deep, damp, bone-level cold. I could hear faint footsteps above. Distant voices. Then nothing. Alone. Locked. And that's when I understood something I should have realized sooner. Brookfield Pines wasn't neglecting people by accident. They had built a system for cruelty. They had a room for it. Hours passed. I measured time by the way my joints stiffened and loosened again, by the way my stomach tightened with hunger, by the way my breath turned shallow to conserve warmth. I sat on the bolted chair and waited, not because I had no other choice, because waiting was part of the plan. When the door finally opened, it was Janelle. She stood in the doorway with a tray in her hands. She didn't look triumphant. She looked scared. "Mr. Mercer," she whispered, "please, eat. Just a little. They're in a mood tonight." Behind her, Devon's voice floated down the corridor. "Let him sweat." Janelle's eyes flicked toward the sound, then back to me. I took the tray. It was oatmeal, lukewarm, bland. I ate. Not because I was surrendering, because I needed to stay functional. Janelle watched me, then leaned in, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry," she said. That was the first human sentence anyone had offered me since I arrived, and I believed her. Because her hands were shaking. They brought me back upstairs like nothing happened. No incident report, no notes, no doctor check. Just shoved me into my room and locked the door again. That night, the laughter in the break room was louder than ever. They'd turned my basement punishment into a story to share. They were proud, and I let them be proud. The next day they escalated. They began timing how long they could leave me without water. They'd pass my door and glance in as if checking whether I'd collapsed yet. At one point, Marcus unlocked my door, stepped in, and tossed a towel at my feet. "Clean up." I looked down. There was a smear of brown on my bedsheet. Someone had dragged their shoe across it. It smelled like old coffee and something worse. I met his eyes. He smiled. "Captain Keypad had an accident," he said loudly so the hallway could hear. A few residents turned their heads. One man started crying without sound. My throat tightened, but I kept my face calm. I bent down. I picked up the towel. I cleaned. Not because I was broken, because every humiliation they added was another nail in their own coffin. They filmed more. They filmed me struggling with the locked door. They filmed me reaching for my tray when my hands shook from hunger. They filmed me knocking and calling for help until my voice went hoarse. Then they showed the videos to each other. Sometimes they showed them to residents right in the hallway, forcing the others to watch as if they were warning them. This is what happens when you act up. One afternoon, I heard Devon tell a resident in a wheelchair, "You keep yelling, we'll put you in the cooler. You'll calm down real fast." The resident's eyes went wide. His hands trembled on the armrests. I caught his name later from a nurse, Mr. Alvarez, 83, stroke survivor, fully aware, trapped in a body that didn't move fast enough to defend itself. I made a quiet promise then. If I got out of this place with the power I'd come in with, it would not be only my dignity that was restored. It would be theirs. Because the thing about bullies and institutions is that they rely on one truth. Most people don't have time to fight. Families visit once a week, if that. They see clean hallways and polite smiles. They don't see basements. Regulators show up with clipboards and schedules. They don't see what happens at 2 a.m. Residents can't report, can't prove, can't be believed. And staff like Marcus and Devon and Rick was the worst, the shift supervisor with the polished voice and the dead eyes, understand that. Rick ran the cruelty like a business. He was the one who told staff to give nicknames. He said it made things easier. He was the one who looked at me and decided I needed resetting. He was the one who controlled the basement code. And he was the one who made a mistake. He underestimated how much an old man could endure without breaking, because he assumed endurance meant weakness. In my life, endurance had always been a weapon. By the end of the first week, the staff had a routine with me. Morning, ignore me until I banged on the door. Afternoon, feed me late. Evening, mock me. Night, lock my door and forget my call button. They thought they were training me. In reality, they were documenting themselves. The second hook, the moment when even I realized this wasn't just cruelty, it was organized, came on a Thursday night. It was late, past midnight. The hallway lights dimmed to night mode. The building quieted into that uneasy stillness where you can hear every cough, every distant alarm. I was lying awake because sleep is hard when you're waiting for someone to decide whether you deserve water. Footsteps approached, soft, careful. My door unlocked. Janelle slipped inside. She closed the door behind her without clicking the lock. For a moment she just stood there, breathing hard. Then she whispered, "They're selling it." I sat up slowly. Selling what? She glanced at the hallway window, then moved closer. "The videos," she said. "They've got a private group. They post them. People pay. They call it, I don't know, old people freakouts, door tantrums, stuff like that." My stomach went cold in a different way. "They're making money?" I asked. She nodded, eyes shining with anger and shame. "Rick runs it. Devin helps. Marcus, he thinks it's funny. They take tips. They do requests. They push residents until they cry or beg. Then they film it." I stared at her. My hands tightened on the blanket. "How do you know?" She swallowed. "I saw the phone. I saw the payments. They're not just neglecting people. They're using them." Using them. That word landed like a weight. In my pocket, hidden in the seam of my robe, was something the staff had never found. A small recorder no bigger than a thumb drive, with a battery that lasted 12 hours and a memory that could hold more cruelty than any person should ever have to hear. I'd been recording from day one. Not everything. Not constantly. Enough. Janelle didn't know that. She didn't know anything about why I'd come to Brookfield Pines. She just knew what she'd seen, and it had pushed her past the point where silence felt like survival. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked quietly. Her jaw trembled. "Because you're different. You don't look like the others when they break you. You look like you're waiting." I held her gaze. She was right. I was waiting. But I couldn't tell her yet. Not fully. Not until I had what I needed. Because the truth I'd been hiding while they called me Captain Keypad, was bigger than this hallway. Bigger than this building. It was the kind of truth that makes people panic when it comes out. So I simply said, "Thank you." Janelle nodded, tears in her eyes. "Be careful," she whispered. Then she slipped out and locked the door behind her again, as if protecting me with the only tool she had left. The next day, Rick confronted me. He came into my room with Devin and Marcus at his shoulders like bodyguards. Rick wore a crisp polo shirt and a lanyard that made him look official. His hair was neatly styled. His smile looked warm to anyone who didn't know what was behind it. "Mr. Mercer," he said, voice smooth, "we've had some concerns." I sat on the edge of my bed. I let my hands rest in my lap, palms up, non-threatening. "Concerns about what?" "Your attitude," Rick said. "Your refusal to cooperate." "I've asked for food on time and for my door to be unlocked when I need the bathroom," I said. "Is that refusing to cooperate?" Devin snorted. Rick's smile tightened. "We have policies. We have structure. Residents who disrupt that structure make it harder for everyone." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice like he was about to offer me help. "I don't want to have to use corrective measures again." Corrective measures. Basement. My jaw tightened, but I kept my expression calm. "What corrective measures?" Rick's eyes flicked toward the door, as if making sure no one else was listening. Then he said softly, "You know." Devin grinned. Marcus lifted his phone, already recording. Rick pointed at my tray, untouched, because the oatmeal that morning had been cold and watery. "Eat," he said, voice still smooth, "or we go downstairs." And that's when something in me shifted. Not outwardly. Internally. Because I realized I had enough. Enough evidence. Enough recordings. Enough witness. Enough suffering. The plan had never been to stay here indefinitely. The plan had been to see the truth, document it, and stop it. I looked at Rick, and in that moment I let him see the edge of who I was. Just a sliver. I said, "You should stop." Devin laughed. "Hear that? Captain Keypad's giving orders." Rick's eyes narrowed. "I'll give you 5 seconds. Marcus counted loudly like it was a game. 1, 2. Rick nodded at Devin. Devin grabbed my arm again. 3. They hauled me up. 4. The service stairwell door opened. 5. They dragged me down, same as before. The basement air hit my face. Damp. Cold. Familiar now. Rick punched the code. The cooler door opened. This time, before they shoved me in, Rick leaned close. "You're going to eat next time," he whispered. "Or you're going to learn what happens when you keep being interesting." Interesting. That word wasn't about care. That word was about their little paid group, their requests. Then the door slammed. Bolt. Silence. I stood in the concrete room, breathing steadily, and I reached into the seam of my robe with fingers that did not shake. I clicked the recorder once. A tiny light blinked. Rick's voice was still in my head. "You're going to learn what happens when you keep being interesting." Above me, pipes hummed. Water dripped. I waited. When the door opened again, it wasn't Janelle. It was a woman in a gray blazer, hair pulled tight, eyes sharp and focused like a blade. She stared into the basement room, took in the concrete, the bolted chair, my bruised arm, and her face changed from confusion to horror in less than a second. "Mr. Mercer?" she said, voice tight. I stepped forward into the light. "Yes," I said. She swallowed hard. "Sir, where have you been?" I could hear footsteps behind her in the corridor. Rick, Devin, Marcus, coming to enjoy the moment. I looked at the woman in the blazer. Her name was Elaine Porter, Deputy Director, my deputy, the person the board had assigned to help me transition into the role I'd accepted 2 weeks earlier. The role I had not told anyone here about. The role I had chosen to enter under a false name and an old sweater, and a quiet posture because the complaints from Brookfield Pines had been dismissed too many times as miscommunications. Elaine's eyes flicked to my bruises again. "Sir," she whispered. "Oh my God." Behind her, Rick's voice floated down the corridor, smug. "There he is," Rick said. "Told you he'd come around." Then Rick stepped into view and saw Elaine Porter, saw the blazer, the clipboard, the authority in the way she held herself. His smile flickered, just slightly. "Can I help you?" Rick asked, tone shifting into customer service. Elaine's eyes went to him. "Who are you?" Rick straightened. "Rick Holloway, shift supervisor." Elaine's face tightened. Then she turned back to me. "Sir?" she said, louder now, so the hallway could hear. "We've been looking for you. The board meeting started an hour ago." Rick blinked. Devin frowned. Marcus lowered his phone an inch, confusion creeping in. I stepped fully into the corridor, standing upright now, letting my shoulders square, letting my voice carry. "That's because," I said calmly, "I was locked in a basement for refusing spoiled food." Rick laughed quickly, too quickly. "Okay, good one." Elaine pulled her phone out with a shaking hand and tapped the screen. She held it up. A professional headshot filled the display. A man in a suit, gray hair, serious eyes. Me. The new director of Brookfield Pines. The title beneath the photo was clear. Walter Mercer, Facility Director. Rick stared at the screen, his face drained of color in stages, like a slow power outage. Devin's mouth fell open. Marcus whispered, "No." I watched the realization hit them like a truck. All their nicknames, all their videos, all their basement punishments, done to the man whose signature would decide whether they had jobs tomorrow, to the man who could call the state within minutes. to the man who had walked into their building on purpose to find the rot they thought no one could prove. Rick's lips moved. No sound came out at first. Then he managed, That's not real. Anybody can. Elaine's voice cut through him, cold and sharp. I have the board chair on the phone, she said. And the state ombudsman. And the police. Step away from him. Now. Rick's eyes darted. He looked like a trapped animal. Devin took a half-step back without thinking. Marcus's phone slipped in his hand. And for the first time since I arrived at Brookfield Pines, the power shifted in the air so fast you could almost hear it. Rick forced a smile that looked like it hurt. Mr. Mercer, he said, voice trembling with false warmth. This is a misunderstanding. We thought you were a resident. We were following protocols. I looked at him. No, I said. You were following habits. Elaine stepped closer. Sir, we need to get you upstairs. Medical evaluation. Now. I nodded once. But before I moved, I looked past Rick, past Devin, past Marcus, down the corridor to the cooler door still hanging open behind us. The concrete room waited there like a confession. Seal this area, I told Elaine. No one enters. Photograph everything. Keep the keypad code. Take the security footage. Take their phones. Marcus's eyes widened. Rick stammered. You can't just... I can, I said, voice still calm. Because I'm the director. And because you locked me in a basement. Elaine's hand was already dialing. Within minutes, the building transformed. Not because the staff suddenly became good people, but because accountability had finally walked through the door. Police came first, 2 officers, then 4, then a supervisor. They moved down the hall with the steady posture of people who have seen what humans do to each other when they think no one is watching. The state arrived soon after. Ombudsmen, investigators, clipboard people with eyes that missed nothing. Rick tried to talk his way out. Devin tried to vanish into a storage closet. Marcus tried to delete videos with shaking thumbs. It didn't matter. Because while they'd been filming me at my door, I'd been documenting them. While they'd been laughing in the break room, my recorder had been listening. While they'd been proud of their private group, I'd been building a case brick by brick. And Janelle, quiet, exhausted Janelle, stood by the nurse's station and handed Elaine a folded sheet of paper with a list of names, dates, and payment app screenshots she'd copied when she realized she couldn't live with herself anymore. That paper mattered. Because cruelty is one thing. Cruelty for profit is something else entirely. By the end of that day, Rick was in handcuffs. Devin was in handcuffs. Marcus was in handcuffs. Not notes in their file. Not a stern warning. Handcuffs. And when they walked past the residents in the hallway, heads down, wrists bound, I watched something ripple through the building. Residents lifted their eyes. One woman in a wheelchair whispered, "Finally." Mr. Alvarez, the stroke survivor, gripped his armrest with trembling hands and let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I walked into my temporary office. Rick's office, really, still smelling faintly of his cologne, and I sat down behind the desk. Elaine stood across from me, still shaken. "I thought you were coming Monday," she said. "I was," I replied. "Then why—" She stopped herself. "Why did you come like this?" I looked at the wall where Rick had hung motivational posters about compassion and teamwork. The irony was so thick it made my throat tighten. "Because complaints were being dismissed," I said. "Because families were told their parents were confused. Because every report said the same thing, no evidence." Elaine's eyes filled with anger. "So you volunteered yourself?" I nodded. A pause. Then she said quietly, "They could have killed you." "They almost did worse," I said. They turned suffering into entertainment. Elaine inhaled, steadying herself. What do you want to do? That was the moment when the story could have gone in a dozen directions. I could have focused only on punishment. I could have settled for firing a few people and moving on. But I had seen the basement. I had heard the laughter. I had watched residents flinch when footsteps approached. Brookfield Pines didn't need a cosmetic fix. It needed a reckoning. So I said, we clean house. The legal part came later, and I'll keep it simple because what matters isn't the language on paper. It's what it did to the people who thought they were untouchable. Families were notified. Residents were interviewed with advocates present. The state opened a full investigation. Criminal charges were filed for unlawful restraint, abuse of a vulnerable adult, neglect, and theft. Then the class action lawsuit came, not as a spectacle but as a collective exhale. Dozens of families, dozens of residents, people who had been told again and again that what they feared wasn't provable. Suddenly it was provable. Because a director had been locked in the basement and recorded it. Because staff had filmed themselves and kept the files. Because Janelle and 2 other employees, people who still had a conscience, decided they would rather be scared than complicit. The lawsuit moved like a river once it found its channel. The facility's parent company tried to distance itself, to claim rogue employees, to offer settlements quietly. It didn't work the way they wanted, because the evidence wasn't just about one bad shift. It was about a culture that had been allowed to grow in the dark. Rick lost everything. Career, license, freedom. Devin's face appeared in court documents instead of private group chats. Marcus's phone, the one he'd used to film residents, became an exhibit. And the cooler basement room was photographed, measured, documented, and shut down permanently. On the day the authorities finished, I walked down to that basement again, not alone, with investigators and maintenance, and Elaine beside me. The door stood open. The concrete room looked smaller in daylight, less like a dungeon and more like what it was, a crude tool built by small people to feel large. I stood in the doorway and let the cold air touch my face one last time. Then I turned and said, "We're tearing it out." Elaine nodded. "All of it?" "All of it," I said. "No more hidden rooms." The rebuilding was not dramatic. It was deliberate. We fired staff who had laughed, filmed, ignored, threatened, or looked away. We brought in new hires with proper training and proper oversight. We raised wages to attract people who didn't treat this work like a punishment. We changed the door locks, not to trap residents, but to keep residents safe without imprisoning them. We installed transparent camera coverage in public halls, visible, declared, regulated, so accountability wasn't a secret. We created a resident council that met weekly with family members invited. We established a hotline that went directly to the state ombudsman, not through internal management. We partnered with a local advocacy group to do unannounced visits. We changed food suppliers. We changed meal schedules. We put dignity back into small things. Warm coffee, clean sheets, a door that opens when you need the bathroom. Most importantly, we changed the tone. Because abuse doesn't start with a basement. It starts with an eye roll, a nickname, a laugh at someone's fear. So I made one rule that everyone understood within the first week. You will speak to residents like they are people you love. If you cannot do that, you will not work here. Some people said it was too strict. Good. This place had been too loose with cruelty for too long. Months passed. Brookfield Pines stopped feeling like a trap and started feeling like what it had promised on the brochure. Not perfect. Nothing is. Not when you're caring for bodies and minds that are fragile and histories that are heavy. But safe, respectful, human. One afternoon, not long after the worst staff had been sentenced and the lawsuits were moving forward, my daughter visited. She had been the one who'd brought me here under the story we'd created together. She had fought me at first. She hated the idea of her father going undercover in a nursing home. She cried in my driveway and asked me why I couldn't just send inspectors. I told her the truth. Inspectors can be scheduled. Cruelty adapts. She hugged me that day like she was trying to memorize that I was still solid. Now, months later, she walked into the new lobby and stopped. The flowers were real. The piano was being played by a volunteer. A resident sat nearby, listening with her eyes closed and a faint smile on her face. My daughter turned to me, tears in her eyes. "It's different," she whispered. "It should be," I said. Then my grandson ran toward me, small arms outstretched, and nearly knocked me over. "Grandpa!" he shouted. I scooped him up, feeling the weight of him, the warmth, the life. And as I held him, I looked down the hallway where my door used to lock from the outside. It was open now. Not just physically. The building itself felt open. When people talk about revenge, they picture fire and screaming and dramatic endings. What I wanted wasn't fire. What I wanted was for the people who had laughed at suffering to never be in a position to do it again. What I wanted was for residents like Mr. Alvarez to stop flinching when footsteps approached. What I wanted was for a place that had been rotten to become something decent, even if it took every ounce of me to make it so. The day the state released its updated report and Brookfield Pines was rated among the best facilities in the state, Elaine brought me the printed copy. She placed it on my desk like it was fragile. "We did it," she said softly. I looked at the report. Then I looked at the small frame on my desk, my late wife's photo, smiling in a way that still made my chest ache. I thought of the basement, the bolt, the cold. I thought of Marcus filming me through the window and calling me Captain Keypad. I thought of Rick whispering that I was interesting. Then I stood, walked to the office closet, and pulled out a single item I'd kept. A piece of paper the investigators had found taped inside the breakroom cabinet. A list of nicknames, their jokes, their cruelty, written down like inventory. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I folded it once, neatly, and placed it in a locked file drawer labeled Reminder. Because I never wanted to forget how quickly a place like this can rot when no one is watching. And I never wanted the people who lived here, my residents, my responsibility, to ever feel like a joke again. That basement door is gone now. The concrete room was demolished and rebuilt into something bright, a small activity space with bookshelves, warm lighting, and chairs that aren't bolted down. Sometimes I walk down there alone, not because I need to punish myself with memory, but because I need to be sure of what we changed. I stand in the new room and listen. No dripping, no humming pipes, no silence that feels like abandonment. Just the faint sound of laughter upstairs. Not the cruel kind. The kind that belongs in a place where people are allowed to be human, even at the end of their lives. And every time I hear it, I think of the moment Rick saw my photo on Elaine's phone, and his face went pale. That moment wasn't the end. It was the beginning of accountability, the beginning of dignity, the beginning of a nursing home that finally became what it claimed to be. And if anyone ever tries to build another basement like that in the dark, I can promise this: I know exactly what to do, because I've been locked in one, and I made sure the door never closed on anyone again.
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales like this, hit subscribe.